All right. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Church Dropout podcast. Church Dropout is a podcast. We talk about issues, topics, and teachings related to faith, life, and culture in ways that are sometimes funny, sometimes serious, but always insightful. If you have not already, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Drop a comment below. Keep the conversation moving forward. Almost forgot how to intro. It's been a little while. And tonight I felt like having a conversation about an article that came out today or tonight, at least the night that I'm taping this. And I felt like talking about it, and more to come, just on like, man, if I could be honest, I've had a conversation or two with a few friends, man, I'm just not feeling this right now for some reason, YouTube, and kind of rethinking some things, and I don't know. So we will see. But tonight I feel like having a conversation about this, something that we've spoken about many times before, and we will continue to speak about here on this channel as long as it exists. But anyway, I read this article, Relevant magazine, and they just wrote it, and it's entitled "Church Feels Weird Right Now. Can we fix it?" And the articles, write about some things, right? There's something wrong with the quote unquote church today, and a lot of people are feeling it. And unfortunately, I feel like the conversation often gets skewed by slander, bearing false witness against someone in their salvation or people in their salvation, or it gets blamed on some weird idea that people just want to sin and don't want to, be a Christian, and, people don't love Jesus, and that's why they're not participating in quote unquote church. And I feel like the conversation always gets hung up on things that, to me, divert from what the real issue is and the situation. Because the truth is the church is weird right now. Like, I think the church is in a pivotal position, a pivotal place where, the church is changing. It's changing. And hold on a second. Said hold on like we was on a call. You know what I mean? Back in the day when you used to have to click over, said hold on, like I had to click over because somebody else was beeping in, right? But if you know. But yeah, the church is in a very interesting space, interesting place, where there are a lot of professing Jesus followers who are no longer feeling the Sunday gathering, which has become known as church. And I think that's part of the problem, right? I think, there are some issues, with what we call the church today. And I think it's being felt. And we're starting to see more and more people talk about it, articles like this. I would like to think that, we are ahead of the game in terms of identifying some of the issues that's going on with the modern church today. Not so much of, I think people have been talking for centuries about the church and how the church functions and different things of that sort. But the idea that people are walking away from the church in search of Jesus, that people aren't walking away from the church because they no longer love Jesus. They're actually walking away from the church because they love Jesus, right? And the church is not a place where people can find authentic, real relationship or even find Jesus, right? I've quoted this on several occasions. Somebody said the founder is no longer found in us, right? The founder of the church is no longer found in us. If Jesus walked up to the doors of many gathering communities today, he would be turned away, and so, yeah, we're in an interesting space. So I want to read this article and give some comments throughout the article, and then also maybe some comments at the end. And then, as usual, I would love to hear your thoughts. So, article title is, church feels weird right now. Can we fix it? Something is off. You feel it. Your friends feel it. The pastor might feel it, but won't say it out loud. Church just feels weird. I do think that people are starting to question. People are starting to feel it. That even pastors are starting to see like there's just something wrong with the church today. It's not that we don't care. Gen Z and millennials aren't anti-church. If anything, we're desperate for meaning, community, and something deeper than the algorithm-fed noise that we scroll through every day. Now, let me tell you, I kind of mentioned this at the beginning in terms of like, man, I'm just not feeling YouTube. And it's not so much of just YouTube. It's just the community of YouTube. And this has a lot to do with it, man, there's just Christian YouTube to me is just, I think this sums it up, meaning, community, something deeper, not just what the algorithm feeds, the noise of scrolling through what the algorithm puts in front of you. I think that's what's so discouraging to me about YouTube, right? There's no conversations about things that matter. There's a lot of talk about doctrine, a lot of debating, a lot of calling out. There's a lot, but there's just no depth to the conversation. There's no real conversation. And then there's just no creativity. Everybody's saying the same thing or saying nothing. If I can be completely honest, they're just slapping a verse and on it and calling it Christian content. And I feel like this is what's happening with the church. If we could be honest, YouTube is really a reflection of the church. It functions almost the same way. There's clicks. You got the mega channels. Like they function like the mega churches, right? They focus on content. They focus on size. They, just like in mega churches, mega content creators only, gather with other mega creators. They're seen as the influence, and it's really just like the church. And a lot of people are walking away from that, especially millennials and Gen Zers. But yeah, there's something wrong, with this. But continuing in the article, because that's a whole different topic, but somewhere between sermon series that sound like TED Talks, worship leaders dressed like indie influencers, and existential dread of another mind-numbing at the movies sermon series, church just isn't hitting the way it used to. And again, this is pointing towards this, culture of church, right? Like this idea, programmatic, church that really just focuses on entertainment rather than depth. And let me say this is not just, in my opinion, what's being felt is not just being felt in churches that are more seeker sensitive. To me, it's also being felt in churches that are even more conservative, right? Like I feel like there's just a miss, whether it's a church that focuses purely on entertainment or a church that claims to have deep theology but just doesn't show any love. I think there's something missing from the culture of church today. So the article continues. So what happened? And is there any way to fix it? Maybe it's the post-pandemic energy shift, the endless scandals, or the rise of evangelicals sharing their unfiltered church trauma online. Maybe it's just the way institutions in general, government, media, even organized religion are struggling to earn trust from our generation. This is a huge point here, right? I think when it comes to church hurt, when it comes to the trauma, when it comes to the scandals, I think for many that's the straw that broke the camel's back. Those are the things that really gave people courage to leave, right? Like I think a lot of people have already been feeling it. And that those events were kind of the icing on the cake as to I can't do this any longer. I don't think that church hurt for a lot of folks was the springboard as much as it was the end piece that really, took down the ivory tower, right? But the reality is, it is this institutionalized understanding of faith and religion and church that really is a turnoff for many people who can't do the church thing any longer. And it's interesting in this article when they say the institution of the church, or they say institutions in general, like government, media, organized religion, and how they're struggling to earn church trust from our generation, because this is a millennial who's writing this. It's absolutely true, right? Like, I don't see any difference between, this is sad to say, between popular church and the government and or any other institution. They all function the same, right? They all function the same. They don't exist to serve the people. They actually exist to be served, right? And these are all turnoffs. Says this, I don't think young people are leaving church. Okay. I don't think young people are leaving church because they don't care, says Pastor John Mark Comer. I think they're leaving because they are too much. They're leaving because they care too much to settle for a version of faith that doesn't feel real, right? And that kind of coincides with what I said earlier. You know, people are walking away from the church in search of Jesus. They're not walking away because they don't care, right? They're not walking away because they don't believe in Jesus, or they don't follow Jesus, or they don't think community is important. They're walking away because they care and they don't want to settle for this version of faith that just doesn't feel real, that feels like the concert that you went to on Saturday night, that you have the same feelings, the same butterflies in your stomach when you hear a song on the radio you get when you hear a song. It's just not real. It's not real, right? The problem arises for a lot of us when the church feels more like a well-produced brand than a sacred space. This is one of the downfalls of the institutional church in any capacity. This is no different in conservative churches. It is just as predictable. I could walk into a Reformed church and tell you exactly what's coming next, right? It's very well produced. It's the same thing, right? Right? More like a well-produced brand than a sacred space. There's a creeping sense that the modern American church is more interested in vibes than transformation. And honestly, we're not buying it, right? A decade ago, it was all about making church cool. Pastors in $1,000 sneakers, LED walls that made Sunday morning feel like a music festival, sermon titles that could double as clickbait. At first it worked. Churches grew. Instagram followers climbed. But eventually, the shiny brand started to feel hollow. The same churches preaching about authenticity were the ones covering up abuse scandals. The ones claiming to be welcoming were only welcoming as long as you didn't ask the wrong questions. And this is true, right? One thing that we have to realize, because I think churches that are a little bit more seeker sensitive, you know, they get all of the bad rap in terms of why people are walking away from the church. But we have to remember that the churches that are seeker sensitive are responding to a culture of church that was very rigid. It's usually a pendulum swing, right? So it's from one extreme to another. It's that moral majority extreme rightism that actually produced this other form of church that was more loose and more cultured to a large degree. But what we found out is neither one works. Right? It doesn't work. It's still hollow, right? There's churches that are preaching about authenticity, but at the same time, they're covering scandals. Like the article says, one's claiming to be welcoming, right? But you're only welcomed as long as, you don't ask the wrong questions. I think Lisa and I spoke about this, but we were just talking about, belief statements, right? Like belief statements, nowadays are really just to keep people out. They really keep people out who don't believe the same things that you believe, right? You go and you look at the set of beliefs and you say, okay, this is a solid church. I'll go there, right? And the only people that end up attending are people who agree with what the church is preaching, right? Or what the church is teaching, right? And so, if you don't believe that, then you're not welcome, right? And that kind of goes into what they're saying. You're only welcome as long as you don't ask the wrong questions. maybe even as long as you don't believe what differently than what we believe. Lecrae, who's openly spoke about wrestling with the institutional church, knows that feeling all too well. When I talk about being hurt by the church, it wasn't so much one particular gathering or congregation, he explains. It was the American evangelical church who I felt hurt by. These people that I was doing events with and who invited me on stage to speak turned their backs on me when I became more vocal about the racial tensions going on in America. Now, some people are going to look at this and they're going to say, yeah, that's because, the issue is that you're making your race your faith. But I think what he's saying here is a little bit deeper than that, right? I think it goes back to what I was just saying before, right? The church has become less tolerant in people who see things differently, right? The church has become less tolerant. It's more about, the church today is more about standing. We rather people understand what we stand against than what we stand for, right? And so it's not so much just about being tolerant in terms of understanding the racial tension that's going on in America. Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I felt that same thing. I had people who were calling me brother, and and I love you every Sunday until I spoke out about some of the things that were uncomfortable about our nation, and I felt that. But what hurt more wasn't that people didn't necessarily agree. It was the treatment that followed the disagreement and the assumptions about your faith and you following Jesus as a result. The church has just become less tolerant to people who don't see things the way that the church does, right? And an article goes on and says, enter deconstruction. If you haven't been through it, you definitely know someone who has. It's the process of untangling what you really believe from what you were just told you believe. I would say this. A majority of people today that we say are deconstructing are really de-churching. They're de-churching, right? We have a lot of people who are holding on to Jesus. They're not questioning their beliefs per se as much as they're questioning what they've been taught to believe, but also how they've been taught to worship, right? We look at the New Testament and we see like it's different. Like the early church, the church over centuries, even when you look at the church historically, just didn't look like the church does today, right? Not just in its form. I'm not saying that we got to wear the same type of clothes or anything like that, but the way we practiced the Christian faith is so much different then than it is today. And a lot of people are de-churching, right? They are deconstructing church, right? But here's the thing that no one tells you. Most people aren't deconstructing their faith because they want to ditch Jesus. They're deconstructing because they love Jesus, but feel like church doesn't look anything like him. And that's a powerful statement right there. I agree with that wholeheartedly. I think the church as a whole looks nothing like Jesus. As I said earlier, the founder is no longer found in us. When I look at the church and how the church functions today, especially the American church, it no longer looks at Jesus. I look at how Christians are applauding this president and his antics and some of the things that people say he's standing up for. But, as I was talking with a friend, he's just bullying and he's abusing power, right? And it's interesting how we as Christians could stand behind that, right? And applaud that, right? When it's antithetical to the Christian faith in terms of how Jesus would want us to act and how we would want to demonstrate Christ's love to those who are other than us, right? And so, yeah, the church today does not look anything like him. The American church, to me, doesn't look anything like Jesus. The article continues and says, you have to demolish a building that is mold invested. Is that correct? You have to demolish a building that is mold invested and then build something. I think they meant infested, maybe. And then build something else on that foundation. Lecrae said, we're not getting rid of the foundation, which is Christ, but we're building on the foundation that is tearing down some things that were unnecessary, some traditions or religions, rules, religious rules that God never intended in the first place. Hold on. Okay. Which is true. Again, this is people. A lot of people aren't deconstructing Jesus; they're deconstructing the church. Pastor and author Rich Villodas put it bluntly: people are longing for depth, mystery, and spiritual practices that go beyond 3 points in a closing prayer. They want something that doesn't just entertain them for an hour, but transforms them for a lifetime. And I would agree with that. I think, again, like, this article, to me, it goes there, but I don't think it goes far enough. Right. I just, I think, that this is absolutely true, that people are longing for depth, mystery, and spiritual practices, not 3 points in a closing prayer. They want something that doesn't just entertain them for an hour, but transform their lifetime. And I would say that the organized institutional church pushes against that. And it can never be organic as long as it's a system. It just can't be. It will never produce what it is that we're after as long as it functions like an organization and an institution. It was never meant to be that way. And that might be the biggest wake-up call for the church in 2025. So can we fix it? The short answer is yes, but not with more branding strategies and rebranded sermon series. Church doesn't need more fog machines or better coffee. It needs honesty. It needs depth. It needs leaders who aren't afraid to say, we don't have all the answers, but we're willing to wrestle with the questions. We want church to feel sacred again, not like a startup to sell us on a vision. We want pastors who care more about discipleship than engagement metrics. We want a place where we don't have to check our doubts at the door, where faith is more than a performance, where Jesus, not a curated aesthetic, is at the center. Can we fix church? Absolutely. But first, we have to admit that there's something broken. And I would say what's broken is our understanding of the church. There's a few things that I think the church needs to do in order to be fixed. But let me just say a few things on this, right? We want the church to feel sacred again. There's been a large movement of people, especially young people, moving into Orthodox Christianity. I don't know what the numbers are. At least it seems that way, right? Like, people are being drawn more towards Orthodox Christianity. And I think a lot of it has to do with this feeling of the sacred, right? Like, church, the way it's done today feels defiled, right? To a large degree. It just feels so lackadaisical or laissez-faire, right? It just feels so, it lacks reverence, right? And so the extreme happens where people will go to something that's super organized and something that seems to have some deep connection with the divine, and that has history, that is historic, that is rooted. And I remember feeling this way, especially when I was walking through my de-churching, deconstruction period. I remember feeling like I almost, committed to walking towards the walking towards the Orthodox church, because the only way that I can describe my, holy discontent was by, my surroundings, by pointing out and looking at my surroundings and looking for something to me that connected more with the way things were or supposed to be. But what I also found is in that was that wasn't enough either. Like, it wasn't the answer. It was, in all honesty, it was another form. So let me get into it, because I'm giving away some of the things that I think the church needs to do. Now, this is not a mystery. This is stuff that I have spoken about on many occasions, and so several things. One, I think if the church is going to be fixed, we need to change the terminology. I think plain and simple. We need to stop calling what we do on Sunday church. We need to stop, right? We need to stop calling what we do on Sunday church, right? We need to stop going to church and start gathering as the church. We need to change. We need to reclaim the terminology that the church is the body of Christ, and that the church is not a building, or it's not in association with a building. It is not an institution. The church is a people. And I think that this, when embraced properly and fully, will help to disciple us into a deeper understanding of what Christ desires for his community and how his community should behave in the world. But as long as we keep naming the institution, or we keep calling the institution church, then it confuses us. And it to be honest with you, it causes us to look outside of ourselves to find Christ's presence, in opposed to Christ's presence being with his church. And so we need to change this terminology. Like it's a must that we stop calling what we do on Sunday church. It seems subtle. It may have worked for some time, but now I think this is what's confusing, is that this idea of going to church has overtaken the idea of us being the church. So I think the first thing, or one of the main things that the church needs to do, is to change the terminology, recapture that terminology, reapply it to the proper thing. The second thing is, I think the church needs to escape form. The concern with these types of conversations is it always leads to doing something, or it always leads to embracing another form, right? Like you're leaving one thing for another. Like I said, when I was rethinking evangelicalism, and I was seeing all of these things that were disgusting to me in terms of like, man, this just does not match what the scripture is saying. The temptation was to adopt another form, was to go into the Orthodox church and forsake this form for another. And I think that that's problematic. Not to say that it's not true, or that somebody might not find solace there, or that everybody there is just there for the form. What I am saying is that we rely too much on the form. We rely too much on the shape of the institution and not the expression of the divine community. Like we because we're so ingrained with thinking of the church as being outside of us, that we associate that with the form, and not only with the form in terms of the space that we're in or the place that we're in, but even how we do it, right? The liturgy, right, behind it. And I think if the church is going to be fixed, the church of the future, then it needs to forsake form. It needs to escape form and stop thinking so much in institutional ways and organizational ways, and escape form. And in order to do that, here's another thing the church needs to do, is it needs to return back to its essence. So escape the form, return to essence, right? The essence of the church. What is the church? And again, that goes back to the identity of the church that Jesus called into being, is the body of Christ, the people of God, the community that Christ has called the kingdom people, right? And we need to return to the essence of what the church is. And in returning to the essence, the fact that we are missional people, we don't do mission, we are mission, will help to, again, fix this, right? Because we're not connecting with spaces or buildings. We're connecting with one another and with God. It's returning to love God, love others. Where I think the modern church today has put an extra step in there. It's love God, love others through the church, right? It's when we think of serving, we think of serving at our local church. And so it's hijacked this idea. And I think the church needs to return back to its essence and push restart. And I think this is why we see certain movements in the world, taking off, because they're I think because they're being persecuted and they don't have time to build up. because they're constantly being scattered. But I think the other part is because they lack form, they're able to focus on essence, right? When you think about the underground church in China and the growth that's happening there, and the growth that's happening in a lot of other places that don't have the focus that we do on the structure and the institution of the church, their growth is exponential and it's deeper. Even if it's not large, it's deeper. People are willing to die for their faith, and that's because they're rooted in the essence of what Christianity is. They're rooted in Christ. They're not rooted into the form. I'll say this. Most people don't have a relationship, or a lot of people don't have a relationship with Jesus. They have a relationship with the church. They don't have a relationship with Jesus. They have a relationship with the church. They don't know Jesus. They know church, right? They go to church, and that's the only time that they open up their word. That's the only time that they hear anything about Jesus, right? And it's no wonder that we have all of these celebrity pastors, right? Because that is the God. That is the God that they're worshiping. It's their reading of the Bible that's sustaining them. It's not the word. It's not the bread of life that's sustaining them, right? And so a lot of people have relationships with the church. They don't have relationships with Jesus. And we need to return to the essence of what Christianity is, return to who it is that God has called us to be in the world, strip it back down, and begin to rebuild on a firm foundation, which is Jesus. And I think this said it here, where faith is more than a performance, and and where Jesus, not a curated aesthetic, is at the center, right? And you could replace that not a curated aesthetic with anything, where Jesus, not our favorite doctrine, is at the center, where Jesus, not our favorite gifts, are at the center, where Jesus, not our building, is at the center, where Jesus, not our understanding, is at the center, right? Like, you could replace that with tons of things that I think we worship today as the church, until we put Jesus back on the throne and we put him back central into his community. I think we'll continue to have this problem. But what we cannot do is forsake one thing for another. We can't, look for another form, because again, one thing that this article, you could walk away from this article thinking is that man, I'm tripping out here. Let me just do it this way. One thing that we can, walk away from this article thinking is that, we just need to avoid churches that, do at the movies every year. Like, we need to avoid churches that, focus on growth. We need to avoid churches that, have worship in dark places. This is not it's not simply a foreign problem, right? There are churches that are deeply conservative, that sing hymns and still don't have Jesus at the center. We see this a lot. There's a lot of churches that worship their doctrine. They don't worship Jesus. They worship their understanding, and they will. This is going to sound bad, but they'll throw Jesus out if he doesn't speak to their doctrine. I heard one guy, I think it was Joel Webbin, who said Jesus is not very. He was talking about something. He was like, Jesus is not very helpful here. Right? Like, Jesus didn't align with what he thought. And he's not very helpful in speaking to that. I think it was his thoughts on Jesus's words on enemy love. And anyway, so I just say that to say that, again, you could walk away from this article believing that engaging in a type or a form or an expression is the answer, when it's not. The problem that we face is that Jesus is not being worshiped. He's not at the center. And so we need to rediscover what that looks like. And the way we do that, is, again, I think we need to take back the language. Stop saying we go to church and say we gather as the church. We need to forsake form. We need to stop worrying so much about the form. And we need to rediscover the essence of what the church is. So anyway, that's it. As usual, would love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below. Keep the conversation moving forward. That is the end of another edition of the Church Dropout. My name is Alan. Thank you so much for tuning in. Like, share, and subscribe. Talk to you soon. God bless.